China recognizes that it has taken a lot from the global system. It's time to give it back. Whether the world is skeptical of that view or not.
Can you see me? I know the signal isn't great. We're still on 4G, so bear with us just a moment. No, it's not that bad. Welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I'm going to show you something that's been compared to the invention of electricity, 5G, or the fifth generation of mobile data networks. Everything else is like the Stone Age. What comes after is the makings of a new global nervous system to be used in everything from artificial intelligence to blockchain to driverless cars, and it will fundamentally reshape global economies. Thing is, for the United States, there's at least one big problem. The market is getting cornered by China. I'll explain and then dig in with Keyu Jin. She's professor at the London School of Economics, expert of all things China, and of course, I've got your puppet regime.
As you know, I have more stuff than any president in the first 2 years, okay? Properties, hotels, business ties, actual ties.
But first, a word from the folks who help us keep the lights on. Before I go into 5G, why it matters and why Chinese state corporations will soon know what kind of detergent you use, let's start with some basics. First generation, or 1G, mobile networks allowed us to make wireless phone calls. 2G let us text. 3G helped with web browsing, opened up porn for everybody, and 4G made live video streaming possible. It also allowed new businesses to flourish using GPS. Think Uber, Airbnb. 5G doesn't just connect smartphones. It connects the Internet of Things, anything with a chip in it. Think self-driving cars, smart cities, your body. Soon, probably, I know, it's worrisome. New innovation and production that will capture massive amounts of data. And that's the thing. If you think oil is precious, get with the times. Data is worth its weight in platinum. Yeah, that's hard to get your head around. Just ignore it. And China has a huge head start. It also has a company called Huawei at the forefront, which already sells more cell phones than Apple, and a lot cheaper. Beijing is on pace to control much of the world's high-capacity online services. And that makes the United States plenty nervous.
We cannot ensure the defense of the West if our allies grow dependent on the East.
Most importantly is that the United States does not trust the companies in China that are driving 5G. As a consequence, the Americans are banning them from investment in the United States, wants American allies to ban them as well. Some are saying yes, like Australia, Japan, and New Zealand. Some are saying no, like the United Kingdom. Others are thinking about it, like most of continental Europe. But this is becoming a Cold War over technology and who controls the data that links the Internet of the future. Why does that matter? Who controls critical infrastructure? Who controls and directs the speed and efficiency of trade and economic growth globally? How about what underpins our military alliances? I mean, if the Europeans aren't going to align with the United States in the most advanced technologies with data, how does that affect NATO? How about your personal privacy? Who gets to see the data that you create? Is it just the private sector, or are governments fundamentally involved? And of course, when we think about innovation and new production in the world, increasingly it's not a single global market. It's getting broken into one driven by the Americans and one driven by the Chinese. Who sits in between those two is an awful lot to play for. Fortunately, we have a rare first-hand look and a behind-the-scene discussion of how this all plays out at the highest levels.
This thing on? Oh, hello, yes. Yeah, Vladimir, thank you so much for doing this by video conference.
Yes, let's cut to chase. Now that we are out of nuclear treaty, we are planning to put missiles in.
Sorry, you're gonna what?
And that unless you agree to this,
Sorry, to what? I didn't hear.
we are going to place nuclear weapons in.
Some setting on my computer? I don't understand. Jared? No, he's not gonna help. Mick, why is this connection so bad? I asked for 5G last week. 7G even.
Okay, Donald. I will take your answer on nuclear question and.
All right, well, what's taking up so much of the Wi-Fi?
Your KD ratio is trash, Ayatollah. It's trash.
Overarching thing for our countries, absolutely.
They're doing Belt and Road. Did they need to brand Belt and Road?
Keyu Jin,
Hi,
again, professor at London School of Economics. Wonderful to be with you.
Thanks, Ian. Good to see you.
What will the Chinese do, in your view, to create more independence and self-sufficiency in Chinese technology?
They've already done it. Now there's an excess supply or excess amount of resources devoted to R&D to make Chinese produce their own chips. So it's already happening.
And what's the time frame by which you could actually see Chinese technology as being more or less broken from Western supply?
Ian, you know, the technology scene is so crazy and dynamic and amazing in China. And here we're not just talking about internet and consumer e-commerce, which is at the forefront of the world, even in some ways more advanced than in the US. Two out of the 4 or 5 areas in artificial intelligence is ahead of the US. This is not including some of the very high-tech areas. Even military technology is rapidly converging. Now, there are many domestic factors that's contributing to that. Of course, the government is able to mobilize a large amount of resources for R&D. But actually, a lot of this innovative activities is powered through by the 3 big internet companies, BAT, Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. It's very interesting that it paints a very sharp contrast with the large American companies. Some have argued that they have, to a certain extent, suppressed some of the innovative activities because of the higher concentration over time and their monopoly over the process innovation. In China, it's just the opposite. Ali is funding the smart cities in China. They are investing in R&D and financing lots of small companies on their ecosystem. So there are 2 misconceptions. One is that Chinese technology is all about copying and no innovation. That's no longer true.
It was true, but it's not true today.
It's definitely not true today. And second is that the government is the main backer, is the major driver of Chinese innovation.
Can you say, I mean, if the Chinese are cut off from Western 5G, I mean, if Huawei is banned from the United States and from European countries, and as a consequence, the global technology market is not global, but instead you have Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent on the Chinese side, and you have Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, a few others on the American side. It's hard to see how that's better for China. Hard to see how it's better for the United States.
For the world.
Right, but hard to see how it's better for China. I mean, I'm having a hard time understanding that. I get the fact that China needs to do some reforms and that this is pushing them to do reforms. But I mean, it's hard for me to paint a picture that this is uniformly good for China.
It's on the technology, in the technology sphere, clearly having 2 separate digital infrastructure technology ecospheres in the world is clearly inefficient and costly for everybody, and for China as well. But the Chinese government realizes that it's very possible that the exchange of knowledge, flows of ideas, technological, let's say, sharing, could potentially really, stop. A lot of the Google, Facebooks, Microsoft hire a lot of Chinese students, and then they return to the U.S. Pushing through a lot of these innovative activities. That can all just stop. So the Chinese is braced for those kind of outcomes. That's not to say that it has to be the ultimate consequence, but they are prepared for that. And we agree it's highly costly for everybody. But Huawei is going to be just fine because Huawei has a huge Chinese domestic market. All these tech companies will be just fine, just occupying the Chinese market and bits and parts of the emerging world.
Now, Keyu, you've said that China's responding to the Trump administration on a lot of this. And I certainly understand that in terms of the buying soybeans and financial sector openness, maybe other sectors as well. But when we talk about technology, I mean, the decision to launch an AI 2025 plan came before the tariffs were announced by Trump. And of course, the fact that Facebook doesn't do business in China. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg even learned some Mandarin. And he ain't allowed in, right? So it doesn't seem like the Chinese are very interested in having a single technology ecosystem globally. Is that correct?
It is fair to say that information-sensitive internet companies have had a lot of trouble in China, and there was government intervention. But that is certainly not the case for companies like Amazon and eBay, which were simply outcompeted by the domestic companies. Now, Alibaba was one out of 12,000 e-commerce platforms. Meituan, a group buying business, was one out of 6,000. It drove out Groupon. The competition is so ferocious, and partly, interestingly enough, it's due to the lack of intellectual property protection in the domestic economy. There's so much imitation that these companies have to constantly innovate, perfect their business models, and be ahead of the curve. So they completely drove out by sheer competition the foreign firms. So it's not, we can't categorically say that the foreign technology companies simply fail because of government intervention. There are many, many examples, and I think industry experts will agree that domestic competition was too fierce for them.
So when we think about the role of the Chinese government in the economy and with the private sector, and you say it's not that the Chinese government controls all these companies, but how do we think about it? Because the Chinese government is, of course, developing a very strong industrial policy. They think of technology as critical strategic sector.
Absolutely.
They are talking about how they're rolling out smart cities, and they have national champions in the private sector for these. I mean, should we think of these companies as not quite private, not quite state, but some sort of hybrid? Is that a better way of thinking about them?
Industrial policies have worked to a certain extent in China. It might also work in other countries. Other countries should feel free to pursue them.
But that's good of you to offer. Absolutely. Yeah.
I always think about if the Chinese want to fund everybody else to consume cheaper electric cars and cheaper technology, why not let them do it?
Now, you mentioned before that intellectual property is something that the Chinese are prepared to treat differently going forward. I certainly understand why the Chinese government would want to say that. I understand why they would want to ensure that IP is more respected for Chinese companies that are more competitive with each other. Yeah. But what is the real incentive for the Chinese to actually create standards of strong, independent intellectual property for Western firms?
The intellectual property...
They clearly haven't, right, thus far.
That's right. To be very honest, my thoughts are the following. Number one is China recognizes that it has taken a lot from the global system. It's time to give it back. Whether the world is skeptical of that view or not is an open question. The second reason is that China really needs to enter a new stage of development, which is based on technology, which is based on innovation. And intellectual property protection is absolutely crucial and critical.
So how optimistic should we actually be about the Chinese economy right now?
Ian, 2 years ago, the world thought China was a ticking financial bomb. They were almost certain there was going to be a financial implosion because of the explosion in debt. Now, what we're seeing in terms of slowdown is a simple economic consequence of deleveraging. If you look at the various sectors, the corporate sector, the financial sector, the leverage ratios have really come down. So that means that, in my view, China is slower but safer as compared to a few years ago. That said, it's not that there's no fundamental problem with the Chinese economy. There are plenty. And the crux of the matter here is the financial system. Chinese financial system really sucks.
Well, if you can't force a bankruptcy with assets that are clearly not productive, and historically in China that has not been feasible for political reasons.
Yeah, there are lots of agency problems, incentive problems associated with bank lending, and because the equity markets and bond markets are nowhere near efficient, bank lending is still the dominant source of funding for these private firms. And what we see right now is that the financial system is not a channel that directs and allocates resources to the productive firms. And that is really the problem. If you can actually make that conduit much smoother, then there's a huge amount of productivity to be unleashed in the private sector.
That does imply a lot less political control of who gets the cash and who doesn't get the cash in China, doesn't it?
These are all very important things, absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, one of the things that I find very interesting is that you have much more innovation in the Chinese economy today. You have certainly some world-beating technologies that are being developed in China. You certainly have a lot of long-term strategy. But you also have political consolidation. I mean, one thing that you would say, certainly in the 5 years since Xi Jinping has been president, is that, if anything, there's more consolidation of power under an authoritarian system than there was when he first came in. And even more so last March when he decided no more term limits, right? How do you balance a stronger top-down system of political control with the kind of economic loosening and vibrancy that you're talking about as an economist?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Ian. First of all, the legitimacy of the party was brought into question because of the massive amounts of corruption that had weakened and debilitated the country before Xi took over. And because the political corruption have weaved into networks, deeply entrenched networks, it would have
local party officials,
local parties,
military leadership, key ministries, SOEs.
Web
Yeah.
of interconnectedness. To fight anti-corruption, you need to break that net. And no matter what we think about political consolidation, that was a necessary condition for that to happen. Now, it's a great question. How do we balance that and economic vibrancy?
Before we get there, because you haven't quite finished the political consolidation, because anti-corruption gets you over the last 4 years, but, no more term limits, that's after anti-corruption has already run its course, right? So individuals frequently decide that they like power and they want even more, right? Not necessarily all according to plan. Like when people ask me, anti-corruption, was it about more power for Xi Jinping or was it about anti-corruption? The answer is yes, right?
I'm going to give you a different view from what we usually hear, Ian. It takes time to do stuff in China. It really takes many, many years to do something. And China has a long-term view, but still, it really takes time.
Do we think that the Chinese entrepreneurial sector has today anywhere close to the animal spirits that we have in the United States or in traditional capitalist societies?
Some of it, for sure. P2P platforms, there were many of them, and many became problematic, so the government had to step in. The government's approach is, you guys just first do what you want, because you guys know what's best and you guys are smart. If there's a problem, we're going to come in and intervene. But they don't stop you from the beginning, because they know it's these companies that's powering Chinese growth, that's producing some of these national champions. But is there an over-optimism? Absolutely. Are we in a bubble? Maybe.
Were you surprised Jack Ma suddenly kicked it over?
He's been around for a long time, and he's on to doing more impactful things for society. I think that's a good move. In China, we don't have enough philanthropy, so I think it's...
You buy that story? I mean, 3 months before that announcement, that wasn't the plan. You buy that story?
He's very active in the education
You
sector.
buy that story?
By what story?
That this was not politically pressured for him to step aside. As a man that was increasingly revered in Chinese society as an independent power base that was a little separate from them.
Well, Alibaba's going to stick around with or without Jack Ma, so we'll see what's going to happen after he leaves. But.
So you're not sure?
I have no information based on that hypothesis, so I'm not going to make conjecture.
That's fair enough. Keyu Jin, professor at London School of Economics. Wonderful to be with you.
Good to be here again.
My name is Oliver, and I'm wondering what would be the repercussions if Trump wins the 2020 election for the international liberal order.
I think the repercussions for the international order are pretty significant if Trump wins in 2020. First of all, there are a lot of countries that have been trying to wait out Trump with the hopes that things get back to normal, but also just the level of mistrust. President Trump, his America First policies, and his lack of interest in working closely with allies, that's been fairly mutual. And if Trump gets another 4 years, the erosion of the global order will speed up.
Hi, Ian. My name's Bill. How concerned are you with AI and the event of singularity?
Bill, I'm quite concerned about the notion of an artificial intelligence Cold War, in the sense that if it's the Americans versus the Chinese and one looked like they're about to make a major breakthrough that would leave the other in the dust, say on quantum computing, that would make all cryptography irrelevant, that the other losing side would think about a preemptive strike significantly. That gets you to escalation, maybe even World War III. I'm not that worried about a singularity. All of those people like Ray Kurzweil that talk about downloading the brain to live forever, that's a copy of your brain. It means that the initial copy still dies. Not good for you in terms of the singularity, not good for me either. And now for something completely different, I've got your puppet regime. Folks, as you know, President Trump's administration is more than a little chaotic. But we have found someone, perhaps the one person on Earth, who can help.
ハロー、私の名前は近藤まりえです。私のミッションは片付けによって世界をときめかせていくことです。こんにちは。
Please do not touch me, okay?
今回のエピソードでは乱雑な環境に住んでいる方にお会いします。片付けを始める前にお家にご挨拶をしたいと思います。
I don't know what you just did there, but as you know, I have more stuff than any president in the first 2 years, okay? Properties, hotels, business ties, actual ties.
それでは洋服から始めましょう。
Mary says she will help me to understand what sparks joy, but we'll see. We'll see.
ときめきの感覚ってわかりますか？それは例えば子犬を抱いた時や朝6時に追悼する時のように感じる温かい気持ちやポジティブな気持ちです。
Yes, I feel this. I know this feeling.
本を起こしてあげましょう。
I don't really have that.
ああ、素晴らしいです。次のカテゴリーは書類です。
Briefing documents are also not, as you probably know, a thing around here.
すごく綺麗です。こちらにある書類は？
Well, those papers are a total disgrace and very unfair, and which I would obviously like to get rid of.
それではこの新聞を手放しましょう。でもその前にお礼を言いましょう。
Thank you, New York Times and other failing media, for your very unfair and constant focus on me, which has made both of us greater than ever before. The very unfair treatment, it's just that it actually gives me joy.
次は小物です。
Well, I already got rid of Spicer, Flynn, Ryan, Smooch, Rex, Hope, Sessions, Kelly, Mad Dog, Haley.
最高な人たちですね。あともう少しです。最後は思い出の品です。
I already have the greatest sentiments. By the way, why are you talking to me in Japanese in the White House?
それはアメリカンパワーが衰退している象徴です。
Not true. We are more respected than ever, and we are fighting with China and Mexico and Canada and the very unfair Europe and also Venezuela and...
外交政策を片付けるときは、すべて中のものを出してしまって、カテゴリー別に分けていくのがポイントです。敵、味方。だいぶ良くなりましたね。
Please, look, Japan has been treating the United States very unfairly for many years, and it's time for this to stop.
すいません。この方を手伝うことができません。彼をときめかせるものは。
That's our show this week. We'll be back next week. We are. That's the way it works. It's a weekly show, so next week we'll be back. Don't miss it. Please watch. In the meantime, if you like what you've seen, check us out on GZEROmedia.com.